been immigrate to the United States. He and members of his family have done well to serve this country, and I'm sure will continue to. We asked him some questions that are consistent with what the line of questioning has been for some other nominees to the administrative positions. And the basic fundamental question I asked him not once but twice, and reminded him he was under oath, is would you follow the orders of the court when it comes to your activity as U.S. Marshal? And he said yes, unequivocally yes. There are other questions that were asked for the record that I'm sure he received some assistance and guidance from other people in preparing answers. But here's what it is, I think, the bottom line that concerns me. I think we understand from what happened last night and what we read in the newspaper that we are living in a heightened, dangerous environment in this country. Judges, for example, have been targets already. Sadly, in my own case, a judge that I appointed to the bench years ago, Judge Joan Lefkoe, had her mother killed and her husband killed in their home by a disgruntled litigant. The same thing is true in the state of New Jersey, and I'm sure Senator Booker can tell that story too, where a judge's son and husband were both killed. Thank you for clarifying that. Son was murdered, husband wounded, but not killed in their home. I continue to ask the judges across my state, and I hope each member will do the same, do you have any concerns about your own personal safety that we ought to address? Now, when it comes to addressing those concerns, the first line of defense is the U.S. Marshal's Office. So the obvious question is how many people work in this office nationwide with the hundreds of federal judges that we have working for us in our government? The answer is 5,600 in the U.S. Marshals Service. And it's also true that weeks ago, this administration sent letters to 5,000 of the 5,600 inviting them to retire. I asked the individual, Mr. Serralta, would you be concerned about filling those positions? And he said yes, as he should have. And we want to make sure we have good professional people. We also have a situation where this president has already removed security protections for several former officials who served in the first Trump administration simply because he was unhappy with what they said about him politically. The president has repeatedly attacked judges who rule against him, to the point where the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court made a public statement urging people to calm their rhetoric when it comes to these judges. We were all justifiably concerned with a demonstration outside the home of a U.S. Supreme Court justice several years ago. I was concerned not only for the conduct that took place there, but for the fact that his residence address was now known to the public and obviously has been spread around. I worry about that. There have been other instances where judges who made controversial rulings went through the pizza scam. You may be aware of it. Someone has been sending pizzas to these judges to let them know in a fashion that we know where you live. That sort of thing just not only breaks my heart, it angers me that any public official would be exposed to that sort of situation. So I take judicial security very, very seriously. I asked the Attorney General and the head of the FBI to respond to me by today to tell us what they're doing when it comes to judicial security, and no response came forward. You know, when we talk about our communications with the administration, is there anything more basic that we ought to share than bipartisan determination to keep our judiciary safe? For that reason, I am concerned about the progress of this nomination at this moment. I am going to withhold my vote for Mr. Serralta today, but I'm not ruling out voting for him on the floor if we get a complete response from the administration about judicial security and whether they consider it important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What was the request you made of me about briefing on I think on the shooting?
Yes, I've asked for a briefing on the investigation of this attack last night.
We'll have our staffs get together on that.
Okay.
Before I call on Senator Cornyn for a few minutes, I told everybody to be here at 10:30. I just got word that one person can't come until 10:45, so I hope that we can still stay together to get these out. Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman.
could I be recognized after Senator Cornyn now that we have a few minutes?
You can be recognized.
Thank you very much.
Me after Senator Booker, if that's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I wrote a letter to the Attorney General requesting an investigation into the conspiracy, which I don't think is too strong a word, of the mainstream media, President Biden's staff and family to hide his mental impairment during the course of the latter years of his presidency. This is not a political matter. This transcends politics. When you think about the power that the Constitution vests in the President of the United States, he's Commander-in-Chief. He is a leader of the free world. He is the sole authority that can determine whether America's nuclear arsenal can be unleashed. Given the dangers that the current environment in the world presents, the most dangerous environment we've seen since World War II, we know from history that wars can be precipitated as a result of mistake and miscalculation. And for this conspiracy to have hidden the impairment of the President of the United States for years and to lie consistently to the American people about his capacity to make decisions which are solely vested by the Constitution in the President of the United States is unacceptable. Again, this transcends politics. Obviously, our Democratic friends are having to deal with the consequences of this politically, but what the issue I'm raising is, I believe, far more important. And then the most recent revelations about the president's prostate cancer, we, of course, extend our prayers and wish him a quick recovery from that. But again, the idea that things like this that take years to develop have all of a sudden sprung to the public attention are now being addressed is just incomprehensible. And it is not possible that things like this could have just sprung up now when we know from medical science and medical opinion that these sorts of things take years to develop. So I just don't think it's responsible for those of us in the Senate or in the Congress or the American people to accept this laying down. I think we need to know what the staff knew, what the family knew, who lied to Congress, who lied to the American people, and who risked calamity due to a president who was suffering from severe mental incapacity during the latter years of his presidency. So I hope that we can get to the facts. I think this is serious enough that it bears further investigation by the United States Senate and the United States Congress. And I would ask you to consider the possibility of holding hearings on this topic. I know there may be multiple committees in the United States Senate that might have jurisdiction over this matter, and I hope we can get together with the leadership on the Democratic side and the Republican side and get to the bottom of this. I think it's too much to ask the American people just to accept what we now know to be the facts. And it's dangerous. And our republic depends on having a president who has the mental capacity to do the job. And it's clear now that President Biden did not, and I think we need to get to the bottom of this. And so I would ask all of my colleagues to join me in asking the appropriate law enforcement authorities to do an investigation to see whether any federal laws were violated. And if current law does not provide for an investigation and a prosecution based on existing law, I think as part of our oversight responsibilities, we should consider whether there need to be some policy changes, which are the proper purview of the United States Congress to pass new laws to protect the American people from what we have just been through as a result of a president who was not competent to perform the job, but whose mental capacity or deficits were hidden from the American people for many years.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I just want to join my colleagues and the ranking member and the chairman for condemning the violence of last night. We all abhor political violence and should in every way, I think, investigate. And as the ranking member said, I think that it would be good to have a briefing from the FBI. I take note of something as one of the bipartisan leaders of our efforts on anti-Semitism to note that hate crimes in this country targeting religious groups are seen in so many of America's great religions, but none come close to the targeting of American Jews. And that should be an added layer of analysis as we try to combat this kind of violence and these kind of hate crimes. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to make 3 points very quickly and ask for some oversight hearings. Trump's Department of Justice has taken numerous concerning actions that demand the committee to exercise constitutional oversight. We are a co-equal branch in a government with checks and balances, and we need to address these issues in hearings. There are 3 concerning DOJ actions that I hope we can discuss, Mr. Chairman. First, we have the issue of due process-less deportations. This week, the conservative Cato Institute reported that over 50 of the Venezuelans imprisoned in El Salvador came to the U.S. legally with advanced U.S. government permission and entered at an official border crossing. Most Americans have only heard of Kilmar Obrego Garcia, but this report from the Cato Institute makes clear he is not the only person who was deported by the Trump administration without due process, who was legally in the United States. I'd like to, without objection, I'd like to enter this Cato report into the record. I want to reiterate the committee's request led by my colleague, Senator Welch, for an oversight hearing into the circumstances surrounding the deportations of more than 200 people removed to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Acts, including the 50 individuals who, I repeat, entered the country legally through with our permission and are now in what is one of the more awful prisons on this planet. Mr. Chairman, you have for decades led and championed the Senate Judiciary Committee's exercise of our oversight, and we need to know who are these 50 people. Can we at least confirm their names and that they're still alive? And understand that an assault on due process anywhere is a threat to the due process rights everywhere. We have seen a 9-0 Supreme Court affirm that. Secondly, at last week's markup, you talked about the Department of Justice's cancellations of public safety grants. Here I have an unanswered letter I wrote on April 30th that was signed by every Democratic member of this committee and 30 Democratic senators total, which I'd like to enter into the record.
Is there objection? I hear none, so it's entered.
We were asking the department for information about the Office of Justice Program's abrupt decisions to cancel at least 365 public safety grants on April 22nd, 2025 that serve crime victims and improve public safety, totaling an estimated $500 million. These are programs that were supported in a bipartisan way that have led to more safety and security and strength in our community. Some of them have helped victims of crime, and they have been unjustly canceled. On the day of this letter, DOJ defunded programs that prosecutors, police, and sheriff's departments, judges, mental health service providers, academics, and more depend upon to keep America safe. This is an outrage to all of us on this committee who share a commitment to public safety, to have resources that we put out that we're being effective in an evidence-based way, to have them stopped by this administration demands that we at least have an oversight hearing to provide, to get a justification, or at the very least have letters responded to. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the Justice Department dismissed several civil rights cases against pattern and practice agencies of law enforcement yesterday. Almost 5 years to the day, this country watched in horror, and we all condemned, when a now convicted criminal, then a police officer, used deadly force to murder George Floyd. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division thereafter investigated the Minneapolis Police Department's pattern and practices of constitutional violations and proposed a fair, court-enforceable consent order to prevent future police misconduct, but to improve the excellence of police accountability and professional standards. They did the same in Louisville, Kentucky, after Breonna Taylor was killed by police during a no-knock raid that was condemned by people on this committee and beyond in a bipartisan way. Yesterday, AG Bondi's Justice Department dropped both consent decrees in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Louisville, Kentucky, where neutral investigations and attorneys found evidence of constitutional and civil rights violations by those law enforcement agencies. Without more than saying that the consent decrees were, quote, no longer in the public interest, the department dismissed those cases along with 6 other investigations where it had shown a pattern and practice of the constitutional violations against American citizens. I sent a letter to the DOJ yesterday with my Democratic colleagues requesting the preservation of and submissions to the committee materials related to retracted police misconduct investigations and drop consent decrees. I ask to enter this letter into the record, sir.
Is there objection? I hear none, so it's entered.
To add to the further outrage to these DOJ actions, there are reports today that people are pushing the Trump administration to pardon Chauvin. This would be unacceptable, outrageous, and injurious to the public safety, injurious to community trust, injurious to the environments we need that keep people safe and support our law enforcement officers. We are lacking in our oversight of a department that appears to be on a turbocharged chip away at civil rights protections and not do common sense measures that can make our communities stronger and safer and have the highest professional standards in policing. I ask again for this third time that you hold an oversight hearing so that we can get some of the answers that Congress and the public deserve. As someone who used to be a mayor and oversee a police department that itself had a pattern and practice investigations, this is not to an end other than making our police department stronger, raising our professional standards, deepening trust, and ultimately creating an environment where we have greater community safety. I hope on these 3 issues we can have oversight hearings soon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With all the requests for oversight hearings, I think we're going to have to prioritize that. Before I call on the senator from Rhode Island, you mentioned something I said last week about grants, and I think I had information yet before the meeting was over that grants for nonprofits and law enforcement, that they were going to reinstitute the ones for law enforcement. That's what I think I said last week, Senator Whitehouse.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond to that, sir?
Yeah.
Some of the proudest work that I've seen in this committee done by people on both sides, courageous leadership by Senator Cornyn and people on our side of the aisle, passed this extraordinary bill on public safety. And a lot of those grants weren't just to law enforcement that were improved. They were to address mental health, something we've all talked about on both sides of the aisle. To focus just on grants directly to law enforcement and not the grants that are going to institutions that help people with mental health. We know a lot of the gun crimes in our country have a lot of unaddressed mental health illness there. And so all of these grants are important, sir, not just the ones that are vital for law enforcement, but also the ones that are vital for public safety, that go to nonprofits that deal with things like mental health that are critical for public safety.
Well, Senator Whitehouse and Senator Schiff withhold. We've got 11 people here, and I'd like to vote on these nominees. The first item is for Mr. Cole. Unfavorably reporting the nomination, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley.
Aye.
Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kinney. Aye. Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt.
Aye.
Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Aye. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
No by proxy.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Padilla.
No by proxy.
Mr. Welch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schiff.
No.
Chairman Grassley.
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 10.
Okay, 12 votes to end favorably reported. Now we'll take up Mr. Serralta. Favorably reporting, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornett.
Aye.
Mr. Lee.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Tillis.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Schmidt.
Aye.
Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Durbin.
Present.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Nope.
Ms. Klobuchar.
No by proxy.
Mr. Coons.
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
No by proxy.
Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Padilla.
No by proxy.
Mr. Welch.
No by proxy.
Mr. Schiff.
No.
Chairman Grassley.
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 1 vote present.
Okay, 12 to 9 and 1 present. The nominee will be reported. Now Senator Whitehouse and then Senator Schiff.
I just wanted to comment briefly on my vote with respect to Mr. Serralta. I share the ranking member's tentative optimism about this individual, and probably would ordinarily be inclined to vote yes, except for my experience, which is how often statements by Trump nominees, either in private meetings or in open committee hearings, have proven to be false. Smoke and mirrors, dishonored as soon as the pressure of confirmation is passed. My particular concern with respect to the Marshals Service is this. They have 4 duties that I think are vital with respect to protecting our judges. Number 1, obviously, protect the judge. Number 2, I hope also obviously, protect any threatened family members of the judge. There appears to have been a bit of a campaign to go after particularly daughters of judges in order to apply pressure to them or punishment to them regarding judicial decisions. So far, my report from throughout the judiciary, and particularly the Rhode Island court, is that the Marshals Service has done an excellent job of protecting the judges and protecting any threatened family members. So considerable satisfaction there. The third is to not just protect the judge and the family, but to investigate the threat. And that is still a little bit spongy. I will say that Mr. Serralta gave good answers to that question in his responses to my questions for the record. So far so good. There, I get into the benefit of the doubt problem of how often I've been misled by Trump nominees in the confirmation process. The fourth, and the really troublesome one for me, is not just investigating the immediate threat to the judge, but investigating the orchestration and instigation of the threats. And my concern with that is that the Marshals Service will never have a complete understanding of the threat posture to do its protection job as well as it should if it isn't investigating the atmosphere of instigation and orchestration out of which those threats emerge. And it's actually a crime to instigate and orchestrate threats, or potentially part of a racketeering activity that could be addressed under civil or criminal RICO statutes. So there's a very robust body of law around making sure that the Marshals Service does its job, not just of investigating the immediate threat, but of who's behind the threats. And here's where we get into the problem with Attorney General Bondi's MAGA Department of Justice. There is every reason, I think, to believe that were the Marshals Service to say, we are beginning an investigation into the orchestration or instigation of these threats, and when you look at them, you see that they are almost always in response to a decision contrary to the Trump administration or its interests. It's not hard to see the pattern. It's entirely logical. You get through any predication test of a prosecutor easily with all of that. And that would mean that it leads to potential MAGA people and potential MAGA organizations. Some of the threats directly followed postings on X by Elon Musk, postings on X by Laura Loomer, and to the extent that they were aware of and complicit in that launching the threat actors, then I think there's a proper investigation to be done with potentially proper charges at the end of it. And my doubt is that that will actually happen. Because the head of the Marshals Service reports to the Attorney General, I strongly suspect that there'll be very heavy blowback against any investigation that goes at the instigation or orchestration of the threats. And that is the assurance that I continue to look for. I'd conclude by asking, Mr. Chairman, that 2 letters be put into the record.
They will be put.
One is from me to the acting director of the Marshals Service regarding this question, which has not received an answer. And the other is just for reference to the head of the new Judicial Security and Independence Task Force that the judiciary has had to set up to deal with this problem of threats and intimidation.
Without objection, they'll be introduced.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Shift. I don't miss votes, so you'll have to adjourn the meeting when you're done speaking.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and I'll be brief. First, I have a bone to pick with Mr. Whitehouse for once again saying what I was going to say, except better. So let me associate myself with Senator Whitehouse's comments. I would only add to his observation that with so many of these nominees, our hope for how they will perform has been betrayed by the realization of how they've actually conducted themselves in office once confirmed. But I share some optimism about Mr. Serralta, based on what I've heard of him and his testimony, his experience. I would add to the challenges he will face that not only is it going to be necessary to continue to vigorously protect judges who are under greater threats than ever and their families, but it's also going to be more important than ever to make sure that court orders are given effect, which is a primary responsibility of the Marshals Service, which brings me to 2 oversight investigation requests I want to make to add to Senator Booker's requests. The first goes right to the heart of the necessity of looking into the violation of court orders. We have another federal judge yesterday ruling that the Trump administration is violating court orders. This with the deportation flights to Sudan. The court finding this in direct violation of its order. I think it is also in direct violation of the Supreme Court's order. It may, in the case of the district court order, be a criminal contempt of that court. How often is this going to go on that the administration violates court orders after nominees come in here and promise, oh, it'll never come up, we'll never violate court order? How could you even ask or suggest such a thing? How long is this going to go on before we as the Judiciary Committee say something, do some oversight of this? If we're going to wait for the Supreme Court to act, they're probably never going to act. When it comes to standing up to the Trump administration, they are a total paper tiger. When these cases reach the Supreme Court, as they have already, the Supreme Court will look for every opportunity not to confront the administration, not to put the administration to the test of just saying to the Supreme Court, buzz off. We need to do oversight of the willful and deliberate decision to violate court orders in this country. Second, I would request an oversight hearing into the weaponization of Pam Bondi's Justice Department and the weaponization of their Office of Weaponization. Seeing in the first hand their unprecedented interference to dismiss the case against Eric Adams, a serious corruption case, and now seeing the flip side of that, the leaked report that their inquiry into or investigation of Andrew Cuomo. It could not be more obvious they are using the Justice Department as now an instrument of their political will. And with that, I've got to go vote, and I will yield back. This committee is adjourned.